Julia always believed she knew the man she married. Raphael was kind, caring, a dedicated father, and a reliable husband. Their life seemed calm, organized, almost predictable, and perhaps that was exactly what made her feel safe. A healthy daughter, a stable home, clear plans for the future. No sign at all that anything could collapse. But sometimes it's not a scandal that destroys an entire life. It's a small crack, a silent doubt. A notification on a phone that pops up when nobody is even looking for answers. That was how it all began. An app she didn't recognize, an unexpected genetic match, and then another, and another one. At first, Julia tried to find some logical explanation, a system error, a misunderstanding, but the names kept multiplying, faces too. Unknown children with birth dates scattered across the years, and a strange connection always pointing toward the same direction. There, among percentages and random names, the idea that she truly knew the man she slept beside every night began to crumble. Because now the question was no longer, who are these children? But rather, what else has Raphael never told me? Julia met Raphael in medical school. He was the kind of student who didn't talk much but always had the right answers. She fell in love before she even realized it. His reserved manner wasn't coldness. It was a calmness that contrasted with the chaos of the world. Raphael made time seem slower. They graduated together, started residency at the same hospital, began dating, and once their professional lives finally settled down, they decided to get married. Without extravagance, just the two of them, a few close friends, and a silent promise that they'd make it work. The plan was simple: stability, their own home, 1 or 2 children, and vacations on holidays. Everything seemed to unfold according to the script. After 2 miscarriages, Clara was born, a sweet, bright child with her father's eyes and her mother's curiosity. Their routine was peaceful: morning coffee together, alternating shifts to care for their daughter, pizza nights on the couch. There were no big dramas, no huge secrets either, or at least that's what Julia believed. Raphael never liked talking about the past. There were no old photos, no youth stories shared at dinner. Whenever she asked about his teenage years or the early days of residency, he always replied, "Nothing special," and changed the subject. Julia never insisted. After all, everyone has the right to keep some parts of themselves private. She even found Raphael's mysterious side charming. She thought it was just the way he was, but it wasn't just that. It was the beginning of a story Raphael had never found the courage to tell, and now it was starting to surface from the most unexpected place: genetics. It was a cloudy Saturday, the kind of day that invites boredom. Raphael was in the shower, Clara was drawing on the living room floor, and Julia was sorting some files on her laptop when she heard the familiar buzz of a cell phone vibrating on the table. She picked up the device to hand it to her husband, but the screen had already lit up. It was a notification from an app she had never seen before, Gene Match. The message simply said, "You have a new genetic match, direct relative detected." Curious, Julia tapped on it. The app interface was simple, almost clinical. A photo of a young boy appeared on the screen, approximately 10 years old. Name, Arthur M., and just below, a blunt sentence: genetic compatibility, 47.2%, possible biological son. For a few seconds, she couldn't comprehend. She thought it was a mistake, a system error. Perhaps Raphael had done an ancestry test and was receiving random notifications. But before she could convince herself, another alert popped up. New match found. This time, it was a girl, 8 years old. Name, Isabella F. Genetic compatibility, 46.8%, possible biological daughter. Julia felt her skin turn cold. Another notification. Then another. Then 3 more. In less than 5 minutes, the app showed 10 different names, all with high compatibility levels. These weren't nieces or distant cousins. They were children. Different ages, different faces, yet something about them, the eyes, the chin, the eyebrows, reminded her of someone. They looked like Raphael. Julia sank onto the couch, her legs numb. She tried to control her breathing, but her mind was already spinning. She thought about cloning, hackers, even coincidence. But deep down, she knew. The information was far too precise to be random. The app even displayed the donor's identification, genetic profile R2748, and the period during which the donor was active. The dates matched Raphael's medical residency years. Before they started dating, yes, but still, this was real. Raphael, the man she thought she knew better than anyone, had children scattered across the world. The bathroom was quiet, just the sound of running water from the shower. Julia remained sitting on the sofa, the phone still in her hand as if she were holding a grenade about to explode. She heard the water stop, the shower door sliding open, the sound of a towel being pulled off its hook, and then footsteps. Raphael walked out of the bedroom with the same calm expression as always, drying his hair with the towel. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing Julia's pale face. "Are you okay?" She took a few seconds to respond. She was caught between reason and instinct. She wanted to scream. She wanted answers. She wanted to run away. "Who's Arthur M?" she asked bluntly, holding up the open phone. Raphael stopped. His expression froze. His body went still for a second, and that second was enough. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't doubt. It was recognition. "Where did you see that?" "On your phone, in the Gene Match app. And it's not just him. There are others, lots of others. Can you explain what's going on?" There was a painful silence. Raphael slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. The towel was now forgotten on the floor. He rubbed his face with his hands, as if trying to erase the years that had led to this moment. "Before I met you, I donated sperm." The words came out dry, almost clinical, as if he were describing a medical procedure. "What do you mean?" Julia shook her head in disbelief. "You were a donor. How many times? How many children could you possibly have?" "I don't know. I did it for almost 3 years during residency. The money was good. I was young, broke, and..." He hesitated. "Honestly, I never thought it would affect us." Julia shot up from her seat. "Affect us? Raphael, this isn't the flu. These are children. These could be our daughter's siblings." "I know," he whispered, "and you never thought about telling me." He stared at the floor, then back into her eyes. "I convinced myself that chapter was closed. When I met you, I wanted a fresh start. You were my future. This was just something from my past." But now the past was knocking at the door, not with scandalous headlines, but with genetic codes and pictures of children who had the same dimple on their chins as Clara. Julia didn't know what hurt more, the fact he'd never told her, or the realization that even without infidelity, Raphael had shared parts of himself with strangers, with other families, and Clara. What was her place in all of this? Was she special, or was she just one more among many? In the days that followed, Julia lived on autopilot. She took Clara to school, treated patients at the hospital, grabbed a quick lunch, but her mind was always stuck in the same place, on the list of names, percentages, and that genetic profile number she'd never forget. R22748. She avoided Raphael. They slept at different times, barely exchanged glances. But what hurt most was realizing that despite everything, he didn't seem desperate. He wasn't trying to force reconciliation or offering empty apologies. It was as if he was respecting her space, or perhaps because he knew there was no way to undo what had been revealed. Julia spent nights diving into forums about sperm donation. She read stories from other wives who discovered similar secrets. Some accepted it, some separated, others never trusted again. But what surprised her most was something she hadn't even considered before: the risk of accidental consanguinity. She came across a recent study that showed a growing number of teenagers meeting online, falling in love, and later discovering they were half-siblings, children of the same donor. It was rare, but it was happening. And then one thought started gnawing at her. What if Clara someday fell in love with someone who unknowingly turned out to be her biological brother? That possibility left her paralyzed. What initially seemed like just an uncomfortable secret now felt disturbingly dystopian. She also started wondering if she was overreacting. Raphael hadn't lied, just withheld information. He'd done it before meeting her, Technically, he was within his rights. But why hadn't he told her? Why hide something that could directly affect their daughter's life? The issue wasn't the donation itself, it was the silence, the burden of sharing a future with someone who locked away his past behind closed doors. And something else troubled her. The app kept sending notifications. The list grew: 15, 17, 21. How many children could a man have without ever meeting them? It was late afternoon when Julia was summoned to the hospital reception. A woman wanted to speak with her. Her name was Luana. She wasn't a patient or colleague, but she'd insisted it was important, personal. Curious and slightly uncomfortable, Julia welcomed her into the hospital's conference room. Luana entered with cautious steps, her eyes carrying a mix of urgency and delicacy. She held a folder and wore an expression as if counting every second. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," Luana said, slowly sitting down. "I know it must seem strange, but I needed to meet you in person." "Do you know me?" Julia asked, trying to understand where this was going. "Not exactly, but I know who Raphael is." Julia's blood ran cold. She froze. "My son Gabriel is almost 9 years old. He was conceived through artificial insemination. For years, I never knew anything about the donor. It was all anonymous. We only had a number, R2748. But a few weeks ago, Gabriel started asking questions. He wondered why he didn't have a father, if he was a real kid. I always told him he was deeply wanted, that a generous man had helped us have him. But now, he wants more than that." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I gave in. I took a genetic test with him out of curiosity, using one of those ancestry apps. I thought it might help him understand himself better, maybe find distant relatives or ethnic roots, something like that. But what I found was much more. A nearly perfect match with Raphael's profile appeared. The app suggested a direct biological relationship. From that, along with data from other profiles with similar connections, I managed to reconstruct a sort of map. It took some time, but eventually it led me to you." Julia felt like a parallel reality was unfolding right in front of her. Luana went on. "I understand he was an anonymous donor. I respect that. I'm not here to intrude. But Gabriel knows now. He's asking questions. He wants to know if his father is kind, if he smiles like him, or if they share any similar quirks." Luana opened the folder. Inside was a photo and a drawing. On the paper was a boy holding a woman's hand on one side, and on the other, a man in a doctor's coat wearing a badge labeled Daddy, drawn in colored pencil, with a bright red question mark beside it. "I don't want anything from you. No compensation, no forced ties. I just came here to say, there's a child who carries a piece of Raphael, who expects nothing but dreams of a face." She looked sincerely into Julia's eyes. "And I also wanted to thank him for what he did years ago, because thanks to his decision, I'm a mother now." Luana stood up, left the drawing on the table and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned around and said, "If someday you feel the time is right, here's my number. Gabriel doesn't need a father, but maybe he needs a story." Then she left. No demands, no drama, just reality. The simplest and yet most overwhelming reality of all. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She lay down next to Raphael without saying a word, her body tense, as if ready to run. The drawing Luana had left was folded inside her bedside table drawer, but she saw it every time she closed her eyes. Gabriel, a smiling, curious boy, and her husband's biological son. His existence posed no threat, and yet simply knowing he existed rearranged everything she thought she knew about herself. In the following days, Julia started looking at Clara differently. She had always believed her daughter was unique, a rare combination of herself and Raphael. But now, that idea felt fragile. There were others, children scattered across places she had never visited, with faces possibly resembling Clara's or Raphael's. Half-siblings, genetic fragments of a single source, and the question growing inside her was no longer, how many children does he have, but rather, what exactly did he leave behind in the world? She returned to the app and began comparing data. She realized some of the other descendants shared traits with Clara: lactose intolerance, migraine predisposition, even a recessive gene related to hearing. She began to understand Raphael's genetic legacy wasn't just biological. It was a narrative scattered and alive in children who didn't even know each other existed. Julia wondered how many of these mothers were facing the same dilemma she was. How many of these children would grow up unaware that their traits came from the same man? More than anger, she started feeling something strange, a kind of grief. Not because of betrayal, Raphael hadn't cheated on her, but for an idea of exclusivity that had died. She never wanted a husband exclusively hers, but she never imagined he'd literally be part of creating so many other families, not by loving other women, but by choosing to be an anonymous donor, someone who contributed to life yet without presence, without connection, without a name. And what did this mean now? Would Clara be okay growing up knowing she might have 20 or 30 unknown siblings out there? And more importantly, if Clara one day discovered the truth, as Julia had, how would she react? With anger, pride, confusion? What if one of them, one of these boys or girls, lived in the same city, went to the same school? In medicine, Julia had learned how to deal with bodies, diseases, and diagnoses. But nothing prepared her for dealing with an invisible inheritance like this, genetics as a ghost, a code shared among strangers. She needed to decide if she'd live silently with this reality or turn it into some form of shared truth. It was a sunny Sunday, and Clara insisted on going to the park. Julia, still weighed down by the recent days, nearly refused, but she gave in. Maybe she just needed to get out of the house, or maybe, deep down, she knew this day would change everything. The park was crowded, kids running between trees, parents distracted on their phones, mothers sitting on benches exchanging confidences. Clara ran straight to the slide, laughing loudly as always. Julia sat on the nearest bench and watched her. She tried to relax, but her mind kept going back to the names listed in the app. That's when she saw her. Another girl, about the same age, with dark brown hair and the same small dimple on her chin. Clara and the girl were playing side by side as if they'd known each other forever. They laughed similarly, shared glances as if speaking the same language. Julia felt her stomach twist. Just behind the girl, a woman approached, her mother. Julia recognized her immediately without knowing exactly how. Almost animal instinct, she was one of the mothers from the app. Her name had appeared among the genetic matches, Bianca. Their eyes met for just a second. It was enough. There were no questions, no introductions needed. They both knew. That girl was Raphael's daughter. Clara and this child were half-sisters. Bianca stepped closer and said with a hesitant smile, "I think our daughters really clicked, huh?" Julia swallowed hard. She thought about denying it, smiling politely and walking away. But something inside her gave way. For the first time, she didn't want to run. She wanted to understand. "How did you find out?" she asked. "I did the test out of curiosity. Then I saw the matches. One thing led to another. Eventually, I recognized you from social media. Sorry if it seems invasive. I just thought maybe at some point it would become inevitable." Both women sat on the bench, not as rivals, not as threats, but as women connected by an unexpected truth. "Her name is Luna," Bianca said softly, "and she loves drawing dinosaurs." Julia smiled involuntarily. Clara also loved dinosaurs. The absurdity of the coincidence would have been funny if it weren't so real. "Clara too," she replied, almost whispering. The two sat quietly for a moment, just watching the girls play. "Do you regret taking the test?" Bianca asked. Julia hesitated. She had never actually taken the genetic test. She hadn't needed to. The truth had come to her another way, raw and direct. But that question was deeper than it seemed. It was about knowing, about facing reality. "I didn't take the test," she said. "But I found everything on Raphael's phone. The matches, the names, the pictures. It was like opening a door to a place I never wanted to enter." Bianca nodded understandingly. "So, now what?" she asked. "What will you do?" Julia looked at Clara and Luna, who were now running hand in hand towards the slide. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe. The only right thing to do is to let them decide what it means, because clearly they've already chosen each other." And then she smiled, for the first time in days. Not a smile of relief, but of acceptance. Not everything needed to be solved right away. Some truths weren't meant to be fixed, only embraced. A few days after the encounter at the park, Julia asked Raphael to talk. For the first time in weeks, her eyes had clarity. No longer anger, no longer raw pain. It was something deeper, awareness. They sat at the kitchen table, as they used to when life still fit into small, comfortable routines. "Clara already met Luna," Julia began. "They played like sisters. Maybe because in a way they actually are." Raphael lowered his eyes. He still carried guilt, but now he seemed ready to truly listen. "I won't punish you for something you did before we met," she continued. "And I know you couldn't have predicted this. Not the app, not the data cross-matching, not the speed at which the world is shrinking distances. But what hurts is that you chose not to tell me, even after our daughter was born. Even when she asked if she was like you." He took a deep breath but didn't interrupt. "I don't want to live in a minefield, where at any moment a child might knock on our door and change everything. Not because they're a problem, but because we haven't made space for them for any of this." Julia pulled an envelope from the drawer containing letters Raphael had begun writing to the families, letters he had never found the courage to send. "You have a chance now to do things differently, to not repeat the silence that brought us here. The choice is yours. But if you want me to stay, you need to open space, not just for me, but for all the lives you helped bring into this world." Raphael moved, nodded. It wasn't an ultimatum, it was an invitation. Over the following months, he sent the letters, one by one. Some families responded, others didn't. But most importantly, the truth began to circulate, with care, respect, and honesty which had been missing from the start. Julia and Raphael stayed together, not as before, but in a new way, more conscious, more human. And Clara began visiting Luna on weekends. They shared toys, stories, and unknowingly the same genetic code. One day, while flipping through a photo album at home, Clara asked, "Mum, why isn't Luna here too?" Julia smiled. She took a pen. Carefully, she wrote on the edge of one of the blank pages, "New chapter." And right there, for the first time, she placed a photo of Luna beside Clara, not as a genetic curiosity, but as part of the family they'd chosen to build despite everything. Not every bond begins with a hug. Sometimes it begins with a difficult truth and the courage not to run away from it. If this story touched you in some way, leave a like, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes all we need is to be just one story away.